Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Bentley. I'm the co-founder of the Legal Innovation Zone. My other co-founder, Hirsch Perlis, will be having a discussion with our special guest in about 2 seconds. Just a few introductory comments. This is our Legal Gold Rush Unmet Legal Needs series. It's the third in a series. We have had a fantastic group of speakers already, and we're really looking forward to today's conversation. Every conversation is recorded, will be posted on our website where you can find it. Today's will be up there in about 24 hours. If you have questions, and we encourage questions, please use the chat function and Hirsch will post them to our speaker. If you have any technical or other issues, not sure what I can do from here. If we have technical issues, just bear with us. The various rooms and basements in our houses are interesting places with which to conduct an international conversation. So really looking forward to today's conversation. It's all about getting your share of $1 trillion and thinking about the delivery of legal services maybe a little more expansively, sometimes a little differently. And with that introduction, welcome all. Hirsch, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Chris, and welcome everyone. We are very excited to have Christina Blacklaws here today to speak to us. So I will do a very quick introduction and then have Christina take on most of the questions. As Chris mentioned, if you have questions, please shoot them off in the chat to myself, and I'll make sure that she gets as many questions as possible. So for those of you that don't know Christina, Christina studied law at Oxford and qualified as a solicitor in 1991. She has developed and managed law firms, including pre-COVID-19 virtual law firms, and set up the very first ABS with Co-op. More recently, she was Director of Innovation at a top 100 law firm. Christina was past president of the Law Society of England and Wales until July. So she was president until July 2019. She now runs her own consultancy business, providing strategic advice, particularly in the area of transformational change, technological developments, and diversity and inclusion. Christina holds a range of non-executive board positions from law firms and legal businesses in the advisory boards of several companies, including Elevate and 21st, and is the legal services ambassador for KPMG. She is a regular international speaker and works across North America, Europe, and the Middle East. So now it is wholly obvious why we are ecstatic to have Christina with us here today. How are you, Christina?
I'm really good, and thank you, Hirsch. Thanks, Chris, for inviting me to speak to you. I always think when I have that sort of introduction, I'm only going to be a disappointment to people, but I will try and cover off some things that are of mutual interest to us. I do feel like I was saying to Hirsch before, this is our tribe, isn't it? All of us who are really interested, fascinated, involved, engaged in legal innovation and development. So I'm hoping that we'll have some really interesting and challenging questions as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So I think we're going to start off with, frankly, the first thing that got Chris and I to look you up many years ago, which was around ABS, alternative business structures. And so as many of the people on the phone know, the UK back in 2007 started looking and launching the ABS. And you happen to be the very first person to ever create an ABS called Co-op. I guess I'd love to ask around what were the opportunities that you saw back then, which got you excited about starting up Co-op, and how do you think those opportunities have played out?
Okay, so I was already really interested in how technology could transform the delivery of legal services. So in the early 2000s, I set up what I think was one of the very first virtual law firms, and we operated up and down the country in the UK. It was just a domestic-based business. But then when the law changed in 2007, it wasn't actually implemented until 2012. So we had a lot of time to think through how we would respond to this. And I approached a very large domestic legal business called the Cooperative Group. Now, for those of you who don't know the Co-op, it is a bit of a national treasure in the UK. It has a very large retail, insurance, it has a very large bank, and it provides a whole range of services, including funeral directory services. So a whole range of services to the UK public. And in fact, in 2010, when we started down this journey, it had a turnover of £14 billion per annum. So a very large business. And right at those early heady days, I think there was lots of talk about Tesco law, so supermarkets coming into the UK legal services. And I spent a lot of time in Europe and in the United States, having to put my tin hat on, because my fellow lawyers were really, I think, worried about the implications of what ABS did, which was enable non-lawyers to own and manage legal businesses, and therefore to have external investment also in legal businesses. So with the co-op, we set up the very first ABS. It was predominantly remotely delivered. It was a national service. We had modular, fixed fee, very reasonable price services, and at its height, we were delivering legal help to around 300,000 people per annum. So it was a really sizable entity, which was really designed for ordinary, hardworking people, as opposed to people who were very wealthy. We also had the largest legal aid contract in the country, so we did a huge amount of legal aid work there, and that worked. I think, really well. I don't think as many were worried and predicted that the sky would fall in and that this would lead to a complete diminution in terms of standards in relation to the delivery of legal services. None of that really happened. But equally, what didn't also happen was a huge raft of new entrants into the profession. So fast forward now, well, gosh, almost 10 years. And what we have in the UK is over 1,000 alternative business structures. But the vast majority of those are actually traditional law firms with, let us say, their chief financial officer and chief innovation officer becoming members of the LLP, so taking an ownership stake in the business. We haven't had this huge raft of new entrants. Having said that, there has also been significant change, for example, with multidisciplinary partnerships, such as the big four accountants really coming in and becoming major players, and some of our ABSs going on to list on the stock market, for example. So there has been some really interesting change, but I don't think the takeover of non-lawyers of the legal services market, that certainly hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, and so why do you think the huge raft of new entries outside of a more traditional law firm hasn't happened yet?
I think there's a range of causes. One of them certainly is the small size, relatively speaking, of the market. So, and you add to that the complexity of the market. So it hasn't been a particularly attractive proposition for external investment to date. Now, that's probably a rapidly changing environment, given and we'll come on obviously to talk about new technologies. When we set up the co-op, the most advanced thing we had was a decision tree. So it was, it's now a very different landscape when it comes to technological enablement, and indeed people's willingness to use technology actually to access legal services. So I think there, you know, there has that those elements have kept new competitors outside, but I don't think that they will be an ongoing and complete impediment to new entrants. I mean, it's often said, you know, if and when Amazon decided that they would want to enter the business consumer legal services market, well, you know, that would be very challenging, let us say, for the incumbents. But that hasn't yet happened, and I think it might be some time yet before the sort of the necessary stars align to enable that to be a very attractive proposition for big business, for external investment. And maybe it's never going to be big enough unless it can be a global proposition.
So let me challenge you a bit on that in terms of the size of the market, because that's actually what this legal gold rush is about. And Chris and I talked about the unmet 1 trillion market, which when we're saying that is the vast majority, and I know it's similar in the UK as it is in Canada and North America and most of the world, where the vast majority of people, the traditional access to justice. So when I used to give presentations, I used to show a picture of, you know, a homeless person, and that traditionally many years ago was the access to justice problem, and today it is professionals, just like most of the people on the phone. And often when I talk to lawyers, they make the joke, I can't afford myself. So there's a very large unmet market of people not getting legal services because they can't afford it traditionally. And you mentioned how the co-op was able to serve, I think you mentioned 300,000. So
Per annum, yeah.
So what about that dichotomy where there's this massive unmet legal need, and technology starting to come? So why is the access to justice problem seemingly growing every year?
Now that's a really big question. To break it down, I agree with you in relation to unmet legal need, and you know, the curve in the UK used to look, I'm drawing here, used to look like that. So, you know, you'd have at the lower end of the economic spectrum, people would have access to justice because up until the Legal Aid and Sentencing and Punishment Offenders Act 5 years ago, which decimated legal aid in our country, up until that point, if you had an issue of English law and you could evidence that you had a meritorious case, then you could get legal aid provided that you met the financial eligibility criteria. So actually, you know, people at the lower end of the economic spectrum were quite high up in relation to access to justice. And then you had this big dip. People obviously at the upper end could afford lawyers, and the vast majority of people fell into the middle, where they either perceived or could not. And I think there's a difference there actually, but they perceived that they couldn't afford legal advice. And you know, just if we just look at the latest piece of research in the UK on this, it's a co-sponsored piece of research from the Law Society of England and Wales and our overarching regulator. Remember, we've got a very complicated regulatory framework in the UK. And maybe we'll come on to that, because in addition to alternative business structures, we can now have solicitors and so regulated professionals working in unregulated businesses. So we might come on to that, but there is the last year's, right at the end of last year, this survey, and it did evidence again that for small businesses and for individuals, there is a lot of unmet legal needs. So about 6 out of 10 people had in the last 3-4 years had a legal problem that they had identified as a legal issue, and about a third of them didn't get any help. And this is for individuals. I think for small businesses it's even higher. But interestingly, of those people who did get help, half of them didn't pay for it because they got free legal advice. So, there is there is a large part of the profession in the third sector who are in the UK providing huge amounts of free legal advice to support people with legal problems, and indeed to take them through court process. So there is that sort of professional safety net, of which I'm very proud. And then there is the issue of legal aid, where it is still available to people, and we government's proposing an awareness campaign at the moment to make sure that people who are eligible for legal aid know that they're eligible. But even so, even you add to that a small proportion of people who are supported by friends and family, and another small proportion in the UK who are supported by insurance, that still leaves a great swathe of people. So I agree, and I agree in principle to the sort of second part of your proposition, that technology can be a true enabler here, whether that is delivered within or outside of the profession. So and what we're seeing certainly in the UK in relation to technological development is it seems to be lagging behind the business to consumer development is lagging behind the business to business development, and that is understandable. But we have yet to see the sort of game-changing technological breakthroughs that will enable many thousands of people to self-help, perhaps, or to be to help self-help to a certain extent, and then to be triaged into some form of legal support. And that's something that that I'm working on at the moment. With I sit on 3 government panels. Actually, I chair 2 in this space. I chair 2 of them, and the third one I'm a member of. And this one is called the Legal Support Advisory Group, and it is our role to try and come up with the transformative innovation in the access to justice space, or at least to commission it. Sorry, I'm aware I'm monologuing now. I'll let you ask another question.
No, I was going to go right into the next question, which you mentioned a few times, which is technology. So, the UK has seemed to lead in many different ways when it comes to the justice system, legal innovation, and legal tech. And you happen to sit on the UK's Law Tech Delivery Panel. I was wondering if you could talk about some of the work that you do on that panel and really what their goals and outcomes are hoping to be.
Yeah, sure. So I chair this panel, actually. So it is a creature of the UK government, but it is fully supported by the industry as well. And we were set up last year, and we have the panel itself is made up of a government minister, the Chancellor of the High Court, Richard Susskind, and the General Counsel for Vodafone, Rosemary Martin, a leading academic in blockchain, Anna Donovan, and we're now just about to recruit some technologists onto in the law tech space onto the panel, and we were set up really to do 2 things. The first is to really encourage and support the digital transformation of legal services in the UK. That's sort of our primary purpose. And in addition to that, or rather alongside of that, to make sure that the the legislative and the regulatory framework is fit for purpose. And I'll talk about a couple of the projects that we have been working on in this space. So we are looking to develop out some collaborative research and development, because we were fortunate enough to get funding from the UK government, and we are housed within a body called Tech Nation. So Tech Nation also in the UK has fintech, applied AI, and insurtech amongst its sort of body of tech, and so we work together, we collaborate, we learn, and that is a sort of fundamental principle of the way that we have been developing out the panel's work. It is entirely multidisciplinary, and it looks to source inspiration and collaboration from as broad a field as possible. So we have been doing a number of things. One of them I'll talk about, which I think would be of interest to everybody, is to the principle of trying to get legal certainty to support the use of and development of technology in the UK and globally, actually. So we're looking to encourage inward investment and growth to scale of the still quite nascent, but I think it's estimated to be $1 trillion worldwide law tech industry. And also to encourage the use of English law. So last year, November, we prepared a legal statement on the use and definition of crypto assets and smart contracts in the English common law. And that has already been used in our High Court as precedent, and in Australia as well. And what we tried to do in that, and it does seem to be working, is to provide clarity of how we in English law view these smart contracts and crypto assets, and how they are treated as property within our legislation. So I'm hopeful that will gain further traction, and now our own law commission is going to do more work off the back of that to support the ever increasing clarity around this. And the other part of that is really to look to support law tech businesses to go from seed to start up to scale up, and to help them negotiate the regulatory and ethical landscape within that. So we have an ethics advisory unit, which I chair as well as a regulatory task force. And we want to help them to help us develop out the most innovative products and services in the business to business area. I talked before about the business consumer and the access to justice area, which another government panel that I sit on is involved in. And perhaps I could briefly mention the another government panel that I chair, which is part of Innovate UK, and with that's called the Next Generation Services Advisory Board. And the government has given us £20 million, which we have utilised for collaborative research and development. So that's across technologists, policymakers, lawyers, and academics. And we have 3 major programmes running, one with Oxford University, one with Sheffield, and another 31 smaller projects, and they're all looking at different issues across the commercial and also access to justice law tech space. And our most recent projects have been around the issue of data access and data sharing, which I think we all acknowledge is one of the key inhibitors or key challenges for us, and key opportunities actually, if we can appropriately gain the insights and unleash the opportunities of the data on which we sit, then that would be, I think, truly transformative for us, our clients, and indeed for access to justice. You start to look at things in a very different way when you can look at big data sets.
So there's a lot to unpack there for me. That's fantastic. So I'm going to start off with what you ended off with data. We love talking about data, and data drives so many of these systems. And unfortunately, one of the big things that hold certainly our companies in the legal innovation zone, and I know companies around the world, back is that getting data from courts, getting data from government, getting data obviously from the big law firms is very, very difficult. So I guess since you sit on some of these panels, I guess I would ask, are there different strategies of how to unlock the data carefully? Because I just find often people fall back on it's private data, so there's nothing we can do. And unfortunately, in our minds, that just doesn't really work anymore, because it's the people that are suffering without allowing these companies to gain that data. So what are some of the strategies that our companies or some of the government officials who are on the line can listen to about how to safely unlock data?
Yeah, I mean, it's a real challenge for us in Europe, as we still are, because we have the data protection regulations, which are quite challenging. But they are, as you say, they're all about private data, and actually the distinction between what is private data and public data is very grey these days. So there's huge challenge, I think, in looking at any issue around data. What is public data is actually probably in aggregate enough to, as we well know, to make perfectly reasonable assumptions about all sorts of things, private things about me or about any of us. So I think there is that challenge across the board, and in essence, this is what we have given. We've given 4 grants of £4.5 million in total to say collaborative research projects to really start to unpick what could be safe and what could be appropriate, and we collectively have, I think, toyed with, perhaps that's been too blasé, but we've looked at and continue to look at data trusts, data ownership, whether we can hold data, and there's a lot of work in the UK around the NHS here, because we have 70 plus years of centralized health data. But one of the major challenges is that the data, and this is as true for the National Health Service as it is for our court system, the data is not collated in a way which makes it easily machine readable or digestible. So it isn't that useful at this point with the technology that we have, and so we are going to have to think quite carefully and potentially be quite stringent where no stringency has occurred before in relation to how data around, let's say, court hearings and court decisions is captured, and I think that the States is much sort of in many ways much more ahead of us in that area in terms of the transparency, but not, I think, in terms of the way the data is collected. It's still as ad hoc and as as non-uniform as it is in the UK. I always say to judges, why does every single judgment have to be a special snowflake? Why can't we capture the data in a way that means that we can gain the insights from what a big body of data would tell us, and that would, as I say, that would really make an enormous difference, I think, in um, in the insights and therefore in terms of policy. We're just, I think in many senses, particularly in relation to the court, we're always just leaping in the dark. We have very little understanding of what the inputs were, what the output is, and what the consequence of that output is. So, but as I say, the series of extremely extraordinary clever people who are working on this, and we hope, well, pre-COVID, we had hoped that all of our bodies of research would be completed by April 2021. So we would be delivering on 44 projects, 44 research and development projects at that point. I think it might slip a bit.
Well, that's the world we live in right now. So
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So you mentioned you sit on a B2C panel, and obviously at the Legal Innovation Zone, we help incubate and scale legal tech startups. And as you sort of pointed out, the majority of our companies are B2B, but some of them are certainly B2C. And so I'm wondering, in your panel, what work do you do? How do we encourage more companies to get involved in the B2C? Because I think, as we discussed, there's a large market there.
Yeah.
And are there strategies to scale them? Are there strategies to best support them? What's happening where you are?
Well, I think there was, just to give a bit of historical context to this. So the Legal Aid Sentencing and Punishment Offenders, we call it LASPO, that act, which was passed in 2012, removed great swathes of legal aid from the from eligibility, out of scope, if you like. So it didn't matter how poor you were, you still couldn't, you weren't able to get legal advice and legal assistance. And government is required to review the outcome of legislation. So after 5 years, they had to undertake a significant periodic review. And the outcome of that review in February of last year was a recognition that this had not been good for access to justice, and that there needed to be some change. So out of that was born a raft of initiatives. One of them, this board that I sit on, the Legal Support Advisory Group, and that is charged with a number of things. One of them is that the government set up a legal support innovation fund. So they've given £5 million to this innovation fund. In addition to that, there are a number of other funds, sort of civil funds. It's all civil, not criminal. They sit alongside that. And the task of this group is to work out what needs to be done. So I talked before about just raising awareness of where legal aid is still available for people, and that is important, because a lot of people think that it just disappeared. They don't go to see a lawyer, and a lot of the sort of third sector advice agencies are also really quite confused about where eligibility lay and where it didn't. So we need to make sure that those people who have it can get it. Then another concept is around co-location and building hubs. Co-location may be with doctors or with other third sector providers, so that individuals who have legal needs don't have to be moved from pillar to post to get all of their needs met. And as we know, quite often these needs come as a cluster, and that if they aren't addressed, then that has obviously very serious implications for individuals, but also for society. So that conceptually, again, is something that that we're looking at. And then the third and perhaps the most exciting bit for our purposes is the innovation fund itself. And the purpose, in a sense, is to invigorate a culture of innovation in the access to justice space. Recognizing, as I said before, that B2B is way ahead. The investment, in other words, the investment hasn't been matched in the B2C community, and that there is this large and untapped market for affordable, accessible, flexible legal services. And so that's really where the sort of exciting project is. We've had a couple of little things that have got in the way recently, such as Brexit and now COVID, which have really messed with our timeframes for everything, unfortunately, with you know, most of our civil service understandably and appropriately being looking into those things. But really, I think what we want to try and do in the access to justice space is very similar to what we've been trying to do in the business space, which is to harness the power of the sort of burgeoning law tech industry to develop out the solutions, and recognizing that without the business case for external investment, government it needs to have some skin in the game to trigger that and to support that initial development. The other things that we know we need to do in this space, though, is about modernizing the legal industry at that end of the sector, and also the third sector. So it needs to be a sort of a triumvirate, really, to make sure that the technology can be adopted. And certainly I've spent a career in strategic change management, and you know, the technology has never been the problem. It's always been the issue of the readiness and the willingness and the ability to be able to adapt and adopt to the technological solutions. So there's a real awareness on that, and those are work streams that we're looking at.
So I'm going to jump in there with what was going to be my next question. You're just rolling right into them. This is fantastic. You know, I saw you hold a fellowship at Manchester University. You've already talked about technology, innovation, the next gen services and all that. Ryerson University, where we're housed, is actually about to open up a law school in September.
Oh, hurrah for you.
Thank you.
That's
so
great.
We obviously put a lot of thought into this, but you're talking about all these skills, and you sort of alluded to it, where technology has never held anything back. So I'm wondering, if you're creating a new law school, if you're training the future lawyer, like, what are the 2 or 3 or whatever you want to touch about? What are the new skills that you think every lawyer coming out of university should really have?
Yeah, well, this is a really, it's becoming a bit of an old chestnut, isn't it? You know, do lawyers need to code? Do coders need to understand law? But I think, you know, if I might say, I think you have got the most wonderful opportunity. It's a bit like the opportunity I had with the co-op, where it was a blank piece of paper, and with that, to be able to develop out the curriculum that is needed for 21st century lawyering. And I can only speak about the UK, and of course, in many ways, in the UK, we have superb world competing universities who are creating very talented lawyers. My criticism is that much of the focus of current curriculum is on lawyering of, and I'm going to try and be kind here, the 20th century, as opposed to the second quarter of the 21st century. And I don't think it's right or fair to the students. It is not enabling them to understand really where the industry is, where it is going to be during the course of their professional life. And many of them are coming out of university life with a skill set which is fairly antiquated and expectations which are not going to be met, and that's just not right. So having said that, there are a handful of universities in the UK who are really getting this and who are making significant changes to their courses to enable a greater collaboration between, as Manchester does. So my fellowship is a result of a collaboration between the computer science faculty, the law faculty, and the business school. And I think that's where the magic lies. If you can get a multidisciplinary academic approach to this, and multidisciplinary opportunities for the students. So they are busy developing out core modules which cross disciplines, and I think that will give the students some really useful insight, because to finally get round to answering your question, I think the skill set is going to be something quite different to the former skill set, which was about being a really excellent technical lawyer. A bit like a consultant in the hospital. You don't need to have you don't need to have a great bedside manner. You don't need to have great communication or engagement skills, because you are there to deliver from on high the advice which comes from the wisdom of your years and experience. Well, actually, if our advice is going to be based on a totally different data set than what's up in my head here, then your value is lessened really as a seasoned lawyer. So I think the skill sets will be a real comfort, familiarity, understanding of algorithms and of the way that they are utilized in the industry. So I'm not suggesting that lawyers will need to code, but they will need to feel comfortable around that. They will need to be willing and able to work in a much more multidisciplinary team than they have done up to date. Second thing I've already referenced is I think you need great emotional intelligence. So fabulous engagement, communication skills. If we are going to continue to be trusted advisors, whether it's for huge business or for vulnerable people, we need to be able to engender that trust and to be able to engage with people. And thirdly, I think we need to be able to think independently. I talked about ethics before, and I think the ethical framework which comes with our training is going to be vital, but also the ability to really think outside of the box, to look creatively and constructively at solutions, as opposed to seeing things as just through a legal problem lens. So that might, for me, it sounds way more interesting than the course I did back in the Victorian era when I was at university. But I think, you know, people will need to think quite carefully about whether they have that mix of skill sets, because it's quite a big ask.
Yes. So I'm going to go back. There's a question on legal aid, so I'm going to shoot back there. They were asking if you have a view on the legal aid as a universal insurance model that's similar to Sweden.
Oh, right. Yeah. Oops. Gosh, sorry. I was trying to look at the chat and very nearly left the meeting. um, so I where do I start with this? I think we had a very good system in the UK. In the late 1980s, 86% of the population was eligible for legal aid, and legal aid was delivered by you know, highly experienced solicitors, legal professionals. Now it's difficult to estimate, but we think it's probably under 20%. So it's been a huge, huge reduction in eligibility over that period of time. And of course, as I said before, for some really important areas like social welfare or housing or family law, it doesn't matter how poor you are, you're never going to get or how meritorious challenging your case, you're not going to be eligible. So I think what we have not got here, a culture of insurance in the UK. It's not really the way that we operate. So you know, our National Health Service, for example, is free at the point of need. We operate at a more sort of taxation based approach. So so other countries have operated a more effective insurance-based system because that's culturally where they are. So Sweden, Germany, are everybody gets insurance. You know, in your own country, it's much more common than it is in the UK. We're not really culturally attuned to that. So I think whether we could change to be able to do that is another question, but it's not where we're at the moment. So what would work for our country is to have much more at the point of need. You don't pay at the point of need. You pay through a taxation system, and yeah, and that has worked, I think, really well for us historically.
Great. When you were president of the Law Society, and I'm sure for a long time before and still to this day, I know one of the things that you really focus on is diversity and inclusion. As I mentioned, Ryerson's about to open up, and being in downtown Toronto, I would imagine we will be one of the most diverse law schools probably in the entire world. But the legal profession worldwide has not always been known as the most diverse profession out
No.
there. I'm wondering, how have you taken steps to help drive better diversity, inclusion, and what can we do here to really, I mean, increase the diversity, and maybe even measurement comes into that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so during my time as it's a 3-year thing, being an office holder and then president of the Law Society. So one of my my 3 major I guess campaigns, one was around access to justice, the other was around innovation and technology and the future of the profession, and the third was around diversity and inclusion. And so we did a major piece of work around this. We did the largest ever global survey. We focused on women in leadership because that's where actually, I say we, but globally, we as a legal profession have an enormous problem. We did the largest ever survey. We conducted 250 roundtables in 20 jurisdictions, so on every continent, and and we produced 3 research reports, one for the international work, one for which is focused on men, and one which is focused on the domestic women's roundtables. And I have to say that we have still got a very long way to go when it comes to gender equality or actually any other equality around diversity and inclusion. And it's a frustration to me, because the social justice case, I hope nobody would argue that, but the hard-nosed business case has been made out time and time and time again. And still, in the UK, we struggle to get, in our largest global law firms, 15% female ownership. And the percentages are as poor for Black and minority ethnic colleagues as well. So it is about, I'm afraid, systemic and institutionalized bias, and that is very difficult to do anything about. However, if you as I say, we put together these reports which give a whole range of actions that individuals and businesses can take. And I would say to everybody, if you are going to be successful into the future, then you really need to put diversity and inclusion at the absolute heart of every strategy, of every business planning decision, because it really does make a difference. It makes a difference to profitability as well, and it also makes a big difference to innovation. The Boston Consulting Group did a piece of research, I think last year, where they looked at diversity and innovation. And what they found was a really statistically significant correlation between having diverse leadership and innovation. So I think the correlation with the most diverse was 45%, as against 26% for the least diverse. So a massive difference, and the most diverse and therefore the most innovative businesses had produced all of their innovations in the last 3 years. So all their products and services had all been developed very, very rapidly and very recently. So I think again, there's, to sort of bring it back to innovation, I think there's a real, a massive correlation, and we really need to keep pushing for diversity of underestimated, underrepresented groups, and to ensure that they have as large a voice around the table as the more overrepresented groups.
Thank you. And have you seen any government programs that have helped drive that, specifically in the law?
So in the UK, we had a policy initiative which has been running for 2 years now, which is looking at the gender pay gap. And the idea is, well, no, the requirement is that any business, and this includes law firms, that employ more than 250 people, have to, on an annual basis, give and make public information about their gender pay gap. And in law, I'm afraid we've had some, quite frankly, horrifying statistics, but at least it's benchmarked. So every year, the firms can look at where they were and where they are now. And it's something that is obviously publicly available, so it could impact decision making from clients and from other, in relation to other businesses. So that I know from the research that we did has not only impacted those very large legal businesses, but almost all legal businesses have been looking for the first time through that lens to see if there is any inequality in terms of remuneration. And the very best law firms are now doing that, not just for gender, but also for ethnicity and disability as well, to ensure that there is no pay gap for any what we would term protected characteristics.
Great. And you touched very early on in our conversation about regulations, and Chris and I often say, as I think you've been alluding to, you have the greatest technology, and if you just take the technology and sub it in for an old process, you're really not making a lot of headway. So I'm wondering, what type of regulation either would you advocate for, or do you think the UK has done a great job implementing that you think will make a big change when it comes to access to justice or opening up markets?
Well, I think probably the UK is the most liberal of markets when it comes to regulation. Not to say that anything goes, but as I said before, from November of last year, lawyers can work in and as lawyers in unregulated businesses now, provided that they are not undertaking what we call reserved activities. And probably for most legal businesses, 85% of what they do is non-reserved. So that covers a vast majority of legal service provision. So I think probably we're at a point where we have enough regulatory landscape there to be able to develop out. So I don't think it's the regulation or the tie of regulation being a problem. I think it is about having, in terms of the business side of things, to having that requirement to do it. And still, many of it in business services, lawyers are instructing lawyers. It's still small spend when it comes to the global spend of the business. So we haven't yet felt the real pressure, I think, to innovate in any way that isn't just iterative. But I think, just to bring it back to access to justice, I think there's a real opportunity, I can almost smell it, of finding some fabulous technological solutions that really enable many, many, many more thousands, perhaps millions of people to have access to justice. So I'm excited to see where we go with that.
Well, on that exciting note, as I think I emailed you, I wish I had 4 days with you. But
I bet the other audience members don't.
No. This has been fantastic. So I'm going to pass it off to Chris for the final word. But I just want to thank you so much. This has been amazing. And just thank you very much for joining us today. I know everyone enjoyed it.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Hirsch.
Thank you, Hirsch. Thank you so much, Christina. Very, very good information there, and lots to follow up on. Like Hirsch, we wish we had more time. Be safe. Look forward to chatting in the future. To all those who tuned in, this is being recorded, and it will be up on the website probably tomorrow. Feel free to access this or any other in our series. This is the third and final in our Legal Gold Rush series, at least for now. We'll take a couple of weeks off, and we'll probably see you again in June. Be safe. Look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.